When I was studying architecture in the 1970s, experts were lining up to criticize high-rise housing. This was the time when the infamous Great Igo high-rise apartments were being demolished. Study after study was published that showed high-rise housing is less suited for habitation compared to more traditional kinds of dwellings. Christopher Alexander concluded that high buildings make people crazy. More recently, a review of 129 research papers over 56 years on the human experience of tall buildings found little empirical support for high-rise housing. Especially on the issue of raising children, the evidence appears very damning. High-rise housing makes necessary the provision of access from the building entrance at street level to the front door of every apartment on the upper levels of the buildings. Not only lifts and staircases, but also lobbies and corridors that provide passage from the staircase and lifts to individual apartment units. It is suggested that the defects of high-rise housing spring mainly from the quality of these spaces between the street and the apartment, what author and architect Del Zille calls intermediate spaces, which he laments as weird anonymous space, neither public nor private. These spaces are neither suited for children to play in or for adults to socialize and are never shown in sales brochures. Is it possible to improve the high-rise housing typology? A recent article suggests that articulating the threshold between public and private domains by introducing the missing element of the semi-private realm has long been a challenge. Failure to do so is a major drawback of the high-rise residential typology. The author, Modi, observes that low-rise housing can have spaces just outside the home, front yard gardens, and streets that serve as an arena for social interaction, but high-rise housing do not have such spaces. Architect cum researcher Oscar Newman said about the same thing 40 years ago. Sure, Great Igo was an extreme case where politics, race, and management all played a part. But Newman had observed that across the street from the apartments that were eventually demolished was an older, low-rise complex occupied by people from the exact same background, which remained fully occupied and trouble-free throughout the construction, occupancy, and decline of the high-rise. Newman theorized that it was the quality of the spaces just outside the low-rise homes compared with those outside the high-rise ones that made the difference. He recommended that architects design in semi-private, semi-public spaces in between the dwellings and the street. His influence over my work of the last 10 years is pretty obvious. I've tried to create what Oscar Newman called defensible space, which Del Zille might recognize as trying to humanize intermediate space. What Modi might say is articulating the threshold between public and private domains. In what I call honeycomb housing, small groups of houses are laid around a communal courtyard, like friends sitting around a table. There is good reason to believe that the features of honeycomb housing, compared to conventional terrace houses, make it easier for parents to allow their children to play outside their homes, encourage neighbors to know and interact with each other, engender trust between them, and perhaps even promote helping behavior. A research colleague at University Technology Mara is now planning post-occupancy surveys to test these beliefs. Luckily, I have been able to put these ideas into practice for affordable housing. It just so happens that cul-de-sac layouts, compared to conventional terrace house grid layouts, reduce the amount of land taken up by roads and increase the area available for private and shared gardens. So next, what I hope to do is to apply the honeycomb idea to affordable high-rise apartments. In this new idea for high-rise, let's call it the sky neighborhood concept. Every resident can step out of her main door to her front yard and beyond that a landscaped courtyard or sky court with a garden fence at the edge. The doors lining the courtyard on the right are the front doors to the apartments. All apartments in this neighborhood in the sky will have such doors, leading into a lofty 6-story high sky court, which contains private and shared gardens. There'll be at least two questions that I will address. How do the floors above the courtyard level, and there are 5 of them, get their access to their own 6-story sky court? And will the cost of providing this lavish-looking green courtyard in the sky be exorbitant? Let's begin with the first question. How is it done? The slide explains the problem to be solved. These are 2 sky courts on the same floor. To be 6 stories high, they have to be flanked by 6 stories of apartments. There has to be a central lobby with lifts and a firefighting staircase, and escape staircases. How indeed can each one of the 6 stories of apartments get direct access to a sky court? Let's look at a portion of this plan to a basic module. The basic module in this layout comprises 2 double-story apartments which occupy 3 floors, one placed on top of the other such that access to both apartment units are on the courtyard level, with one unit connected to another floor above the courtyard level, and the other apartment is joined to the floor below the courtyard level. This is looking at the pair of apartments from the front. As you can see, the pair of 2-story apartments take up 3 floors, but both can be accessed from the courtyard level. This is the same pair of apartments, but looking at them from the side. Stacking 2 pairs of these interlocking apartments on top of each other produces a 3-story high sky court. However, stacking these apartments on top of each other such that the courtyards flip from one side to the opposite side produces a 6-story high sky court. This slide shows how each floor in the 6-story high sky court can open onto its own shared and private garden. The first floor above the courtyard level is part of a unit which is on the same level as the courtyard. The second and fourth floors are both linked to the third floor, where there is another courtyard which is hidden from view. The fifth floor is linked to the courtyard, one floor above it. This is a look at the floor plans. Apartments on the courtyard garden level either have stairs going down to bedrooms on the floor below, in red, or have stairs going up to the bedrooms on the floor above, in yellow. Above this stack of floors is another similar arrangement, but with the courtyard flipped onto the other side. In equatorial Malaysia, the blocks are best aligned north, south, east, and west, such that all the 4 sky courts would get sunlight. This design thus allows in plenty of light and ventilation, but provides cover from direct rainfall. This makes the sky courts suitable for planting medium-sized trees, shrubs, and even grass to make it attractive for social and recreational use. Each and every resident in this new type of apartment has been afforded with a shared and a private garden. And so the features of honeycomb housing have been replicated for high-rise. So on to question number 2. Will the cost of this new type of apartment be exorbitant, making it suitable only for the high-end market? To answer this question, we designed a 30-story prototype so that it can be compared with conventional types of apartments and help explain how the new concept provides for circulation more efficiently. In this design prototype, apartments face landscape 6-story high sky courts. 274 apartment units are served by 16 of these sky courts, each courtyard typically consisting of 16 duplex apartments. On the ground floor of the podium block are the entrance lobby, shops, and the service and utility rooms. On the first to third floors are car parks. On the podium level are 18 apartments, community and prayer halls, and a bigger green area. These are the floor plans for the apartments facing the sky courts on the east and west. And these are the floor plans for the apartments facing the north and south sky courts. To investigate the circulation space advantage of the Sky Neighbourhood apartment, an analysis of the built-up area breakdown of the 30-story design prototype was undertaken. Space usage was divided into 5 categories: apartment interior, the apartment external area, the front yard of the unit, which is saleable, the shared communal sky court area, circulation space, comprising corridors, lift lobby, and staircases, and finally, services. This tabulation is that of a typical courtyard and the 3 stories of apartments that are accessed from it. The table shows that with the Sky Neighbourhood, the circulation space is only 4.32% of the total floor area served by it. With service areas added in, the percentage for circulation plus services is only 5.1%. In fact, this is a remarkably low figure. To really appreciate this fact, let's now look at some examples of high-rise apartments with conventional layouts. Conventional high-rise apartment layouts may be categorized by the method of access to each apartment: single or double loading corridors for slab blocks and central lobbies for tower blocks. This is the Belfront and Trellick Towers in London with a single loading corridor. The single loading corridor balcony access allows the apartments to have windows against the access balcony as well as the external wall on the other side. This arrangement is not very efficient, especially with a standalone lift tower. Circulation here takes up 21.06% of the total floor area. That's quite high, but not very much higher than the single loading corridor apartments that are the norm in Singapore. Apartments with a central loading corridor is more efficient, serving apartments on 2 rows along it. However, the apartments it serves are only able to have windows on the external wall. They sometimes have internal airwells along the double loading corridors. But compared with a single loading corridor, the ventilation and light from these airwells are not so good. This is a view of Binapuri apartments in Puchong, Selangor, with a double loading corridor. Here, circulation makes up 16.03% of the total floor area. This is the Blues Point Tower in Sydney. In the tower block, apartments are positioned around a central lift lobby. In this setup, there is a minimum of corridor space, but on the other hand, the number of units that can be served by the single lift lobby is limited. Here, the efficient arrangement of circulation space is offset by the rather inefficient sharing of lifts by a small number of housing units. In this tower block, circulation takes up 11.9% of the floor area. The lift only serves 7 units on this floor. This table shows the 3 examples of conventional layout plans and compares them with the Sky Neighbourhood design, where the circulation spaces, including any corridors and services, occupy less than 5.1%. In contrast, the circulation space for conventional apartments range from 11.9% to 21%. Indeed, circulation space in the Sky Neighbourhood design is minimized to less than any existing type of apartment. The sellable apartment space, inclusive of the respective private gardens, is about 86.5% of the available space. This compares well with the sellable apartment area making up about 79 to 88% of the total area in the conventional apartment. Some may suggest that the courtyard area or portion of it should actually be counted as circulation space. Actually, any space or room will have within it some circulation space. For example, a living room contains within it a portion that is used to move around, but by convention, We simply call it the living room. And when one measures and displays its area, one doesn't minus away the circulation space within that room. By contrast, the corridor is a monofunctional space. Its space is to allow for movement from one area to another and does not have other uses. So it is categorized as circulation space. Displaying the sky court area without deducting the circulation space makes sense and is consistent with accepted convention. Even when counting in the shared gardens or communal courtyard area as circulation space, the total for it at 13.5% is lower than that achieved in the majority of conventional apartments. This is a very substantial efficiency improvement that is all the more remarkable because it is achieved by making the apartment design more attractive, not less, by extending the benefits of having a landscape courtyard to every apartment. Indeed, the introduction of the courtyard is the key to it. In another study, the Sky neighborhood apartments are compared with 6 examples from the last 60 years of high-rise social housing in Singapore. The floor areas of each of the Sky neighborhood and historical examples are broken down according to function and then compared with one another. The analysis undertaken show that the new concepts paired with the examples require much less circulation space. The provision of shared open areas is also analyzed and shows that the Sky neighborhood layout provides more open spaces within the block footprint and that these areas are more visible and accessible from the apartments. Another factor for cost reduction is the provision of lifts. The lifts in the Sky neighborhood model only need to stop every 3 floors at the courtyard levels. From the entrance level to each apartment, residents walk up 1 floor or down 1 floor to get to their bedrooms. In this 30-story example, only 9 stops are required on the 27-story car park. I used an online calculator provided by Kony on the design prototype. When I entered lift stops at every one of the 27 residential floors, the calculator estimated that 3 lifts were needed. However, when I entered the actual lift stops required, which is 9, the calculator estimated that only 2 lifts were needed. The neighborhoods in the Sky apartment layout is a new approach to solving the problem of circulation and intermediate spaces in high-rise apartments. The corridors are replaced with spacious sky courts. Remember that corridors are non-saleable areas that actually cost money to build. Yes, extra costs will certainly be incurred to construct and landscape the 6-story high sky courts. However, savings arising from totally eliminating corridors and reducing lift stops can claw back much of the extra costs. Whilst images of corridors can hardly be used to help sell an apartment, about 40% of the courtyard is saleable area, whilst the balance can be marketed as a desirable communal amenity and as a unique selling point. According to this argument, house buyers will be more than willing to pay for the extra cost of outdoor private and communal gardens. Then there is the cost of land, which in city center development is far more important than the cost of construction. This 274 apartment building on a small site of 1.89 acres produces a plot ratio of 4.9 and a density of 145 units an acre, which is far above the current planning standard in Malaysia, which is only 60 units per acre. If planning authorities can accept the argument that high-rise housing can be socially acceptable, then they might be persuaded to approve a higher density. The very reason for high-rise housing is the exorbitant cost of land in urban centers. The high density and plot ratio of the Sky neighborhood layout can contribute to savings on land costs. Even a small fractional increase in density will make a big impact in the cost of each apartment and can easily exceed the extra cost of the Sky. Back in the 1970s, our neighbor down south probably took note of all the bad press against high-rise housing, but then carried on building them nevertheless. Now Singapore is showing the way in how to build quality private and public high-rise housing. Many newer buildings by the Housing Development Board and private developers already include green and social spaces on the upper levels of tall residential buildings. The concept of sky-rise green has been promoted by the government, and there are already tried and tested ways of achieving this, along with many new ideas. Many doubts and uncertainties about potential problems, like practical things like waterproofing exposed floors and planter boxes, about what plant species are most suitable, how to prevent trees toppling over, about construction and maintenance costs, and so on, can be allayed by looking at the built examples in Singapore and the solutions adopted. Local authorities in Malaysia might look at the controls on the permitted intensity of development and how it is being used to encourage sky-rise greenery by granting bonus gross floor area for balconies and sky terraces over and above the permitted gross plot ratio. This is a big incentive. The private gardens should be able to qualify as balconies and sky courts as sky terraces, and we could end up with a situation where the saleable area is bigger than the gross floor area allowed. This should make developers here more ready to adopt new ideas like the sky neighborhood concept. I believe that as land becomes scarcer and even more expensive in urban centers, the Singapore experience, defined by the lack of land, will become more relevant to Malaysia and other countries. After all, high-rise housing and sky-rise green can be said to be a method of producing artificial land that is a small fraction of the price of the real thing. There is already an existing menu of ways to produce artificial land in airspace: multi-story car park rooftops, balconies, rooftop terraces, sky terraces, sky bridges, sky-rise communities, and so on. My hope is that the Sky Neighbourhood Sky Court can be a useful addition to that menu. After all, it does have some advantages. For sky terraces, certain floors have to be kept as void to make way for it, but Sky Neighbourhood Sky Courts do not take up space that could have been occupied by saleable apartments. Compared to rooftop terraces, the Sky Neighbourhood Sky Courts are not placed above apartment units and so avoid the worst problems of waterproofing. The Sky Neighbourhood concept makes it possible that every unit has a front garden and uses a shared garden as circulation space, making possible the elimination of corridors and helping to reduce costs. The fruit of this research that I hope to be able to enjoy is to make possible for each high-rise resident a private and a shared garden. Thank you.